Hey YouTube, we are going to be making creme caramel today for kind of a crowd. So if you are looking for something perfect, impressive and delicious, a huge treat and fairly simple-ish to make, I am going to be doing that. This is something I make for our family as often as I can. It's everyone's favorite thing. It's a giant custard that you basically steam bake and then it gets unmolded and it magically has a caramel sauce that will flow down all over the sides of it. So I'm going to show you what we're going to need, which is pretty basic. And there are kind of multiple moving parts to this, but it isn't hard. If you can read, you can do this, I promise. We are going to need, behind me, you can see 2.5 cups each. 2.5 cups of cream, 2.5 cups of milk. We have that. We're going to need a dozen eggs because we're going to be using 6 whole eggs and 6 yolks. This is not a low cholesterol dessert. And then also 2 cups of sugar divided into 2 separate 1 cups and a teaspoon of vanilla. And I have 1/4 cup of water here, which we're going to use to make the caramel that's going to go in the pan. So I'm going to show you and walk you through how to do this. It's not hard. It is best to make it the night before because it'll sit in the fridge overnight and then you unmold it just before serving it and it's beautiful. All right, let's get started. I'll show you how to do this. The first step that we're going to do, you're going to use, this is about 100-year-old Pyrex. I've had this probably since the early 1990s. This is what is it, a 2 quart probably? 3 quart, it doesn't say, but about that big. This is what is going to hold the caramel to start with, and then we're going to put the custard on top of it. And then you're going to want a second pan big enough to be like that. You're going to set this inside this second pan with water around it to bake. So we're going to set that aside for now and we're going to start making the caramel, which is just going to line the bottom of that pan and get nice and hard before we put the custard in. So you've got 1/4 cup of water just going in a saucepan, and we're going to put in 1 cup of the sugar, and we're not going to stir this. We're just going to heat it and swirl it on the stove. So I'm just adding that to the water. And it feels weird to not stir things. If you cook a lot, you want to stir this. All right, we've got the sugar in the water. We're going to go ahead and turn on the heat, like a medium high, and then you're basically going to just swirl that around as it heats. And I'm not going to do it on the stove because it kind of is noisy, but I'll show you. We'll turn the sound off here for a sec while I do this. All right, there you can see we've got the sugar sort of dissolved evenly into the water, and I'll show you a little trick when you're doing caramel and you have this little line of sugar crystals that will form on the outside of the pan. This is a little trick I learned back in my cake making days when I used to make caramel for things. You can take a pastry brush and dip it in cold water and just go around and brush that down. And then you won't end up with that line of granulated sugar sort of cooking to the side of the pan like that. So you see that? It just kind of flows back down into, and you kind of just use the water to, not really rinse, but you can see what I'm doing. And what we're going to do is just swirl that occasionally, and we're going to cook that until the sugar dissolves and it'll start to form a caramel. And basically just cook it until it's as dark as you would want to see the caramel sauce on your creme caramel. The trick I've learned though is it's going to look darker in the pan than it will once you pour it. So go a shade, just a tiny shade, a little bit darker than what you're going to want to see in that pan, because you're going to put it in that white pan when this is finished, and kind of rotate the pan around to quickly coat the bottom of that pan with this little bit of hot caramel, and then it will harden as it sets up and cools. We're just going to give that a little bit of movement now and then just to keep it kind of circulating around in the hot water while it cooks. Keep an eye on it. You do not want to burn this or you'll be starting over. And while that is just slowly darkening up on the stove, we're going to go ahead and separate 6 egg yolks out of these 12. We're just going to set the whites aside, and this would be a good time to have another recipe on hand ready to go that uses 6 egg whites because we don't want to waste them. So I'm going to set those aside and put the yolks in there, in the shells, and we want 6 yolks. So we're going to have 6 whole eggs going into this cream and milk mixture and 6 yolks. And you can, I think I've done this before when I'm like dieting. You can try to make this a little bit lighter calorie or cholesterol version if you like, by doing, cutting out the cream and just using milk. I've done that, and I don't, you know, it's gonna taste a little bit less creamy, obviously, but it's still just as good. And what I'll save these egg whites usually for, I have a really, really amazing recipe for coconut macaroons, which are like heaven. So I may make a batch of those right after this. Stay tuned after these messages. All right, there's 6 yolks. And then we'll set the whites aside for some other purpose. And then we have 6 whole eggs here. So we're gonna use those here shortly. All right, it has been about 9 minutes. And you can see how dark that is. It looks pretty dark, and you're starting to be able to smell that cooking. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the heat, and we're gonna pour this quickly into this pan and tilt it around. All right, we've got that, and we're gonna just pour this quickly. And that's fairly dark because I let it sit for a second while I was fiddling with the camera, but it'll be all right. And then take this pan, and you've got hot, hot, hot caramel in there, and it's a little dark, but I'm going to just rotate the pan around, if you can see that. And I'm trying to just spread that caramel around the bottom and up the sides a bit. And it's hardening, literally while you're working with it, it's hardening. So you kind of got to work fast. And do not, whatever you do, get this on your skin, because it is, I don't know how hot, but very, very, very hot. All right, so we've got that coated on the bottom of the pan, and that is going to sit and set aside, and it's fine just the way it is. This, see, this is a little darker, but this dark, extra dark golden is fine, because it's going to become a sauce in the end when we unmold this custard. So again, I would go a hair less than what I just did, but I lost a minute on the stove while I was talking to the camera. So this is just a tiny bit darker than I would normally do, but fortunately it didn't get too dark. So that is already hardening. We're gonna leave it, turn on the oven to 325. Let that start cooking. Our next step is going to be to turn the eggs, the cream and milk, and the remaining 1 cup of sugar into the custard. So how we're going to start that is we're going to put the sugar, the egg yolk, and the 6 eggs in a stand mixer. So I'm going to crack the rest of those 6 eggs into there. So you're going to whip those until they are thick and yellow. While those are whipping, the stove is preheating. We're gonna go ahead and put the milk and the cream both just into a fairly good sized pot. And we're basically just gonna be simmering this together with the vanilla. And if you wanna get fancy, you could add a vanilla bean, but I'm just doing a teaspoon of real vanilla. Just whisk that together. And we're gonna just simmer that over basically a medium to medium low heat. We're just wanting it to get hot, but not boiling. While the milk and vanilla mixture is simmering and getting up to temperature, we're gonna get it hot, and then we're gonna whip it slowly into the beaten egg and sugar. And I've gone ahead and put, to make life easy, put this caramel filled tray inside. This is basically a double, you know, like a double boiler, almost bain-marie setup, where you're going to be doing a water bath. So we're gonna put this inside here. We're going to pour the finished custard into this, and then we're going to fill this, be boiling some water now to fill this. You want this to come about halfway up the side of this pan once the custard is in there. A trick you can use if you want to make life easier on yourself, you can put this assembly like this and just go ahead and put it in your oven on a middle rack of your oven. I'm going to pull that top rack out. Put it on a middle rack and have it sitting there like this when your custard is ready, and then pour the custard in, pour the hot water in, and then you can just slide the whole rack back in the oven, and then you're not having to carry this full of boiling water and boiling custard from here over to the stove. And since I literally just failed to record this, but what I just did is I added the hot milk very, very slowly, because if you've ever heard of tempering eggs, you want to add hot milk to egg, any kind of an egg mixture, very slowly. So I started with just the tiniest drizzle while the mixer's running on sort of like number 2 on a KitchenAid, and just drizzle a little bit of the hot milk in, and you're basically, when you'll warm those eggs up, you do not want to hit eggs with hot milk, because you will cook the eggs and have scrambled eggs in this bowl. So add them very, very slowly. I can't recreate it because I just did it. And if you do it right, you should have a nice smooth mixture when you're done, and that the eggs will be nice and warm with the milk, but they will not curdle. But to make sure that you're not getting any curdled bits in the final custard, we're gonna pour this through a strainer into this bowl with the caramel. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in the oven and get the strainer, and then we'll strain the custard right into that lovely caramel lined dish and get it baking. All right, I'm going to go ahead and show you how I do this with the pan, the easy way. So I'm going to go ahead and set this tray with the caramel filled pan right on the oven rack. And you can see that that's right there, ready to get pushed into the oven. And then we're going to take our custard mixture and a strainer. And we're just going to pour that carefully right into that custard pan. And that, you can see how much easier that is. I'm probably spilling it inside the oven here. But you can see how much easier. And that will strain out any bits of egg that may have been curdled a little bit with that hot milk going into it, but it looks really perfect. I don't see any in the bottom of the bowl, so we did good on the blending. I wish you could have seen it. Then you're gonna take your boiling water and we're just gonna pour it carefully. You don't wanna get it in the custard. And we're gonna just use that hot water to fill the tray up to about half the depth of that custard pan. And this is gonna be what creates steam and a hot water bath for it to cook in. And you can see how much easier this is, because now I can just slide this tray in on the rack rather than trying to grab this with full of all this boiling hot everything and not burning myself to infinity. And then you can just very carefully make sure it's set in the middle of that tray, and then you can carefully just slide this in. And even then you're gonna see some movement. It's kind of sketchy. I would not want to try doing this with this on the counter. Carefully slide that in. We're gonna bake that for 45 to 60 minutes or so at 325. So I will start checking it at 40, I'll probably start checking it at 50 minutes. And you're gonna be looking for a nice golden brown top on the custard, and you want it to be firm when it's jiggled. So you don't want it to feel fluid when you give it a wiggle. So we'll come back here in a while and check it. And after 50 minutes, we're gonna check it. And that looks like a nice golden brown top. But we want to give it a little shake and just see how does it wiggle. So give it a jiggle, and that is still a little bit liquid. I'm going to give that another probably 5 to 10 minutes in the oven. Right, that has been another 10 minutes. So this has been a full 60 minutes, and we're going to just give it a jiggle. And that looks fairly firm. I may give it 5 more minutes, because you really don't want to have this unmold when you serve this. You're going to flip this over and unmold it, and you don't want that custard to be too soft in the middle because it won't hold its shape. So I'm going to give it a few more minutes. All right, this has been 65 minutes from the time we put it in, and that looks fairly nice and firm. And what we're going to do is take it out, and I'm going to just pull this whole thing out carefully and set it on the stove, turn off the oven, and we're going to just let this continue to cool down with this water bath still around it. So carefully pull the whole tray out like this, and don't let anybody be around you when you're doing this, but we're going to just take it out carefully and just slide the whole thing onto the stove like that. And that is just gonna sit and cool down in that water bath for a while. And once it's entirely cool enough to handle, I'll take it out of the water bath and put a lid on it. I happen to have the lid to this, so I'll put the lid on it, and it's gonna go in the refrigerator overnight. And then tomorrow I will show you the magic trick that happens when you unmold this. And all of that lovely caramel sauce is down inside there. And when you unmold it and flip it over in a big one swift move, it's going to be upside down, and the caramel will then be on top, and it melts all down over the top of this wonderful dessert. I can't wait to show you. See you tomorrow. All right, it is the next day, and this has been in the refrigerator chilling since yesterday. What you're going to want to do is take a sharp knife and go around the outside of the whole thing, really tight to the edge, because we're going to want to loosen the edge. And remember that caramel is underneath there. So we've done that, and I have just filled this sink right here with about 1.5 inches of very hot water just out of the tap. And what you're going to do, since the caramel, remember the caramel is in here, we're going to set this in that sink of hot water just for a little bit to soften that caramel layer that's underneath there. And while that is softening, we've got our big platter. So you want a platter that's gonna hold, you want some depth to it because you're gonna have caramel sauce come out in the mix. And then we're gonna try to do this all in one movement where you flip it over and unmold the whole thing. And the caramel sauce should have softened enough to pour down over the beautiful custard. So that's just sat there for that long, as you just saw. We're gonna take it out. And this is always sort of the moment of truth. What I do, and I've done this a million times and it never gets any less scary. You take the platter, put it right on top of that. So I've got them kind of sandwiched. Lift it up with whichever arm you trust the most. And then in one motion, we're gonna just unmold this and see what we get. Ready? 1, 2, 3. And you can hear it, it dropped. And there is the upside down tray. And we're gonna just lift this. You can already see the sauce starting to accumulate. And I just let it sit for a minute. And then you lift this off. And look what it made. Isn't that beautiful? And this is what's left in the bottom of the pan. It'll leave a little bit of the caramel, but that's fine because we got most of it. And this is ready to serve. Isn't that gorgeous? So I'm gonna go ahead and put that in the refrigerator until our company gets here, and that's gonna be a gorgeous dessert. And there you have it. Perfect, gorgeous crème caramel to serve for a crowd. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.